Yo, 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 what is going on, AoEM Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today I thought it would be fun to talk about projects and the impact that they can have on kingdom builders and new kingdoms or servers, and good things for you to know, where sometimes projects just get a bad rap. There are a number of people out there who will tell you, and depending on what side of the fence you fall on, that projects, jumpers, new start groups, are not good for the game. And then there are others, depending on what percentage of those individuals you feel is appropriate to designate. I happen to be one of them, where I feel that there can be a lot of good positives that come from groups. However, I always like to put an asterisk here, which is when they're done right. So as always, if you enjoy the content, make sure you throw us up, because it helps out a lot. So first and foremost, let's define what a project is, where would you go to find projects, and then talk about the pros and cons on if they are good for the game as a kingdom builder or if they're not. So firstly, the whole idea really behind a project is where you gather a large number of players, or really however many of them, but usually it is for at minimum 1 to 2 alliances worth. So let's say that your starting alliance can have 50 players in it, right? You could still end up having 60 or 70 people that you plan to go into or start together in a new kingdom. And even if you have to do some tech, you have to go grab some objectives, do some flags to help expand your member capacity. Usually you can typically expand member cap pretty early. So it's not really out of the realm of possibility to have this idea of having more players in than whatever your starting alliance capacity would be, because usually you'll still be able to get them in pretty quick. And so whether you start with 1 or 2 alliances, you're doing so in a way of trying to achieve a goal. And that goal can be anything from you just want to be the strongest alliance in your zone 1, maybe you want to be able to make it past zone 1, into zone 2, maybe you want to make it to zone 3, maybe you want to be the strongest alliance in the kingdom, maybe you want to be the one who conquers Kingsland, and you're the person who's going to end up capturing the Imperial City. Maybe you want your alliance to be the king or queen alliance, if you will. Shout out to my ladies out there who are leading alliances. And maybe you have 2 or more alliances. Maybe you have 3 or more alliances, or 4 or 5 or 6 or more alliances in your group. And you have more grandiose plans. Maybe you want to not only conquer one zone 1, but maybe you want to conquer multiple zone 1s. Maybe you want to conquer all the zone 1s, all the zone 2s, and then eventually be able to have Kingsland. It really just depends on what your goals are as a project. However, where we really, I think, get into the nitty-gritty on projects being good or bad is what are the outcomes that you want? What is the end result? Because some projects you can join where all they want to do is just take over everything. They don't really care about other alliances. And those can have negative impacts, where one example, and I think this is probably the most prevalent that I usually see on average in projects across kingdom builders within this game genre, is alliances will start off in a zone 1. And they're very much kind of overly concerned with this mine approach of, I need to have the best territory, I need to have the best objectives, I need to have the best buffs, we need to have all the rewards or first captures, etc. And it very much can lead to kind of overexpanding, in a sense, and overburdening the area, meaning that when you take over more, all that means is it's less for others. And by it being less for others, this can also come from you either attacking people, from you attacking territory and removing it. All of this plays into the new player experience of being able to enjoy a season. Now, some of you might ask me, well, boss, isn't this a war game? You're right, it is a war game. But it's also an activity game. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you're a game developer and you're thinking, how are we going to make the most amount of money possible? Well, we need our game to be active. We can't have an inactive game or a dead game, because the less amount of overall players means the less percentage or the lower percentage of people that may consider spending. So you just have to think about it in that kind of frame. If you have 100,000 people that are playing your game, and let's say 1% of those people will spend money in this example, then 1% of 100,000 is less than 1% of 1,000,000 players playing your game. And that's the whole idea, is that you're just trying to identify as many needles in the haystack as possible. And we can maybe kind of go down this path of like deep dive kind of TED Talk assessments for kingdom builders and some of the player psychology and some of the approaches that developers may or may not take. But at the end of the day, the whole idea really is you want to try and keep your kingdoms as healthy and as active as humanly possible, because it really is only a net benefit for you down the road, and it's also a net benefit or positive for the developer. And again, we can always touch on that topic another time. But now let's kind of get to where would you actually go if you wanted to try and join a project. Well, there's a couple places, but probably the most important one, at least for now, that you would go to would be on the Discord. In the Discord for the official Age of Empires mobile, you would go on here, you go to Ally Recruitment, and you're probably just going to end up posting some ad here. And you can see there's already some projects going on. There's this one here, which is the Galactic Empire. I think this is probably the latest or the newest one that's going on. And then you'll probably see a number, oopsies, didn't mean to click that. I meant to click jump to present. Right, and you'll see people just kind of bumping their post up, right, so they can try and keep it front of mind or top of mind here on the thread, and then, or the forum, I think is what they're calling these now. And then you can also go through and look for a number of others as well. Now, you can also look at like world chat, because maybe in-game world chat or maybe other content creator Discords will probably have some kind of posts about this, where you might be able to go and find other channels on other content creator Discords, or even some project Discords or other big Discords related to your game. And they might have recruitment channels you can use and take advantage of, and or just go and look to see who else is recruiting out there. So that's typically where you would go. Now, as we kind of do a quick segue back to talk about some of the pros and cons here. So I think one of the immediate, so I guess let's talk about some of the cons first, then we can kind of go to the pros. So some of the cons is that, and I've kind of alluded to this a little earlier, but you don't know what you're going to get with a project. And you have to, first and foremost, before you even get into the kingdom, your project has to actually be able to make it and sustain throughout your prep. And so an example of this would be, let's say you started your project, you're recruiting. You need to be able to last long enough until you actually get to your day one account creates, in this case. And so, meaning, because there's no jumping here. So there's not, for example, right, this is a term from other kingdom builders for some people who may or may not be familiar. It's basically where in some other kingdom builders, you can start an account, let's say in Kingdom 1. You can stay there for 5, 6, 7 days. You basically gather as many resources, as much material as possible. You level your account up as high as possible, usually at a certain kind of cap, right? So like, let's say you would level your account up to level 7 or level 8, but then you try and do as much as you can in other areas. And then eventually you migrate your account using something like a beginner migration item, generally speaking. And then you take that account and you move it to the newest kingdom. So basically it allows for you to boost an account and then start in a brand new kingdom with said boosted account, versus new players who are just coming in and downloading the game and they have to start from City Hall 1. And so some of these downsides can be that, one, once your project gets into the kingdom, is that, and let's just kind of go like worst case scenario, is that you just want to attack and kill off everything. You don't care. Like I said, you want to be the number one alliance. You want to be the top alliance in your zone. You want to have the most territory. You want to have the best stuff. That I very much view as more of a negative than I do a positive, because you're also killing off some of the player base in your kingdom. You're basically creating a higher percentage chance that those things can happen. In addition, if you are not taking a development standpoint, there's also the thing that can happen, which is, let's say you become the top alliance or the top project, and things just don't end up going well. Or let's say that, I guess before we get to that one, let's say that things don't end up going well, things fall apart. You can have an implosion effect where oftentimes this usually happens internally versus externally, where projects will be affected, not necessarily by others, unless there's just like incredibly strong players or very high spenders or just another big alliance out there that just either wants to kind of do their own thing, they're just kind of, butting heads or opposing forces. We can touch on that in a moment. However, if things happen internally and your project or your group ends up imploding, that can also have a lot of ripple effects, because one, it can very much decentralize this your group, whether it's 2 or more alliances within your project, assuming so. And it can cause, for one, unexpected player movement that can happen, which can also partially lead to a level of demotivation. And that can then factor into, from the player psychology standpoint, almost create kind of these small little snowball effect moments where because you have to think about it, if you're a player and you're playing in an alliance and you've been there for a little while, you probably feel a sense of community, you probably feel a sense of belonging, you probably feel engaged, you feel that you're probably socializing well, or at least getting accustomed and familiar with that group. If things end up happening and implosions occur, maybe you need to move from one alliance to another. Maybe your R5 switches, maybe the officer switches, maybe now you have to go and fight against the other alliances in your project. Maybe all of a sudden you're getting an announcement that says, oh, well, we're no longer a part of this project. I mean, there really is so many things that can happen that may cause internal strife that could then snowball or spiral to an implosion state within a project. And that can have its own ripple effects on the kingdom as a whole, because let's say maybe you had a structure. Let's say maybe you were viewed as the leading voice in a kingdom, but now all of a sudden you're not. Maybe you have to go through this shakeup of figuring out new management. Those are things that can affect a kingdom in a negative way, even though you'd hope they wouldn't. There's also the chance that you go into a kingdom with a project and it generates a opposite effect of, and more specifically, a rivaled effect. So maybe there's another alliance, maybe you go in there with another project. It's usually more likely that you as a project will go into a kingdom and you will face or may come across an alliance that wants to challenge you. And that's whether it's kind of same region, maybe different region alliance and players. This is something that happens decently often. And so from there, I guess we can talk about some positives. I think those are some of the negatives and some of the downsides of running projects. I guess one of the things I'll mention on the negative side is that, if you're in a project and let's say it doesn't go well within the first, 1 to 2 zones, you can often have this thing where, I guess there's 2 things I should talk about here. You can often have this thing that happens where you will go to you'll kind of meet a point of no return or a restart point. And what this means is that if you're in a project, you may, depending on how the kingdom plays out, let's say things aren't going your way, right? You're like 1 alliance or 2 alliances, kind of a smaller group, and you go in, you have some people that spend, you oftentimes, but let's say you're not the biggest fish in the pond, or maybe there's some early PvP and early fighting, and you just don't have enough numbers to really sustain that, to keep the fighting up, and people just would rather develop their account and not worry about having to fight as early as they might have to or might need to consider to. And because of that, you may have situations where your alliance or your project kind of loses sight on what its potential goals or expectations that may have been set early. And if that happens, you might not necessarily face an implosion, but you may face a stagnating period where things just kind of flatline at that point, where you're not really in a position to kind of do what you sought out to do. And so you may then consider restarting your accounts. And what can end up happening is you might just lose people, where some people just want to stay, some people may restart with you, and then other people might restart but not join you. On the flip side of this, if your project works out well, you can also have situations where alliances and players in your kingdom will decide to restart and or quit depending on how you collaborate and work with them or not in the kingdom. So there's actually like a number of ways that you can, really there's a lot of ways that you can just lose and have a lot of player drop off overall. So let's talk about maybe some of the positive things here. So I think probably one of the most important positive things that can come from a well-oiled machine, a well-structured project, is that it can bring a level of organization and coordination and communication to a kingdom early on, or I guess you could say earlier than later, or earlier than expected. And this can be done kind of a couple ways, which really helps, I think, with being able to give the kingdom an early identity, an early sense of self, and an early direction on where the kingdom is going and who is there to support the kingdom, who's in place, who's kind of in charge, who's managing. It can really eliminate a lot of unnecessary conversations, people thinking that, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go into this kingdom and we're going to be top dog. And then all of a sudden you see, a couple alliances and they're all repping kind of the same tag or similar acronyms, or a part of the alliance name is the same. And you're like, oh man, this is a big group. You might kind of immediately lose some of those aspirations, but also some of those, and for others, I mean, outside of your group. But at the same time, some of those may take that as just an okay thing. And so the second one is kind of an add-on or an addition to point one, which is that oftentimes when you're going into a kingdom, it's really about who has the biggest stick. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to use your stick in a bad way, even though unfortunately some groups do. And that probably will not change, sadly. However, what I really mean is that it's really about trying to establish a presence and a foothold in the kingdom. And like I said, that doesn't mean that you're going to always go around and just ravage and kill everyone off and have this whole mine approach. What it means is that when you have the biggest stick, you can deter people away from potentially challenging you. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen this happen in the amount of projects that I've ran, where you go in with 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 alliances, you have hundreds of players, and nobody really wants to challenge or face you because they just know that it's an uphill battle. And it's, in most cases, usually a low percentage chance of them coming out on top. And again, that's kind of aside from the smaller occurrences where, if, like I said before, if you have kind of rogue players, rogue alliances, people that are willing to spend just because all they want to do is fight, some people that maybe haven't played kingdom builders for a while and they just think that home kingdom is like the end all be all, that's it. I can't tell you how many times I ran into situations with that where it just took so long to really explain to some people what KVK and what SVS is, and how the whole idea really isn't to kind of have civil wars in home kingdom. It's really to develop and build up, and then you can fight to your heart's content in a KVK or an SVS. And so again, there's I don't want to kind of dive down a separate rabbit hole so I can stay on track for the most part here. However, those are, I think, some of the positives that you can really come out. One of the other things I think is that when you have a large group, be kind of assimilating yourself. And I'm not saying losing your identity or leaving the alliance you're in, but usually if you want to be able to make it into further zones and you want to be able to have access to higher RSS tiles, and again, I'm kind of speaking generally here, right? You want access to, we'll just say, resources, objectives, rewards, etc., that you can get, and you want to feel as though there's a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment and being able to play out a kingdom, a storyline, etc. These are things that you can also get with a project, right? It's kind of like joining a union or joining a large company that maybe has a little bit more of a safety net and security on being able to last longer and probably won't go under or have a lower percentage chance of going under or you losing your job compared to maybe if you just joined a startup or a small business, right? Or started working for one. And so there are some of those benefits that you can get as well by being able to kind of assimilate or join one of those, right, if you find that that's an option. And so, yeah, those I think are some of the benefits. I'm sure there's more, but I just kind of wanted to focus at least on what I feel are some of the bigger ones, some more of the easier highlighted points at the moment for how you would view benefits and positives of what projects can bring to kingdoms, and then, like we said earlier, touching on some of the things that probably aren't really in favor of projects and where you can go to find projects, and giving you a little bit of a history lesson on kind of the idea behind projects, depending on your view and kind of what someone wants out of it. With that in mind, I think that's probably going to be it for me. I'd love to know what you guys think on this one. Again, I very much enjoy my kind of content as much as I could, pump out guides here and there about progression and events and etc. And those are all kind of pretty standard. I very much like to talk about the other side of Kingdom Builders, which is kind of what really goes into the game as a whole. I often talk about kind of progression-based content being that, where you would usually see people talking about events, they're talking about how to level up, PvP pairings, doing things in open field, rally garrison, etc. Right? These are kind of what I would refer to as more progression-based types of content. And I do think that's necessary. However, as I said, I just also like to talk about what I think are kind of the unspoken things that happen in Kingdom Builders, so that way people have a little bit more of a realistic approach on what am I actually experiencing, what am I actually doing here, what is actually going to happen on a day-to-day for what I'm going to be seeing and what I'm going to be subjecting myself to. Because I think when you have a better understanding of that, it really can kind of help you immerse yourself into the game, where you have a little bit more knowledge, you feel a little bit more educated, and you understand some of these nuances, because there are a lot that go into Kingdom Builders. So that's going to do it for me. Again, this is definitely a long-winded one. I don't know if I was necessarily expecting this one to be that long, but there's quite a bit to talk about. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one, especially if you enjoy these kinds of topics. And let me know what you think in the comments down below. That'll do it for me. As always, until next time, we'll catch you later.